Education. Thank you for joining us this morning to have a conversation around ODE's idea of having a single contractor for the YCEP programs, Youth Correction Education programs. Joining me here this morning is Sam Coe, the Education Specialist, and Bonnie Lanning. Just placed on your last name. Bonnie Lanning, who is our fiscal person. So if you have access to the computer, you'll see our agenda, which Sam is going to go to right now. There we go. So the agenda this morning is to kind of do an overview of the YCEP program so we're all on the same page. Look at the impact of multiple contractors and the impact it has on YCEP students. Impact of multiple contracts on ODE. Benefits of the current process. Single contract proposal. The decision-making process, and what if current contractors remain, and then allowing you guys any questions at the end. Obviously, if you have any questions as we go through or anything you want to add, please feel free to jump in and go ahead and interrupt. That's not going to be a problem. Right now, it's a pretty small group, so there's not a lot of you folks on the phone. So we'll go ahead and move forward. Okay. So we're going to start with just an overview of the Youth Correctional Education Program, just to make sure that everybody is on the same page and understands what it is we're talking about this morning. So the Youth Education Correction Program exists within the OYA closed custody facilities. And there's essentially two types of facilities that OYA runs for these youth. The correctional facilities are their actual secure facilities, your McLarens, your Hillcrests, your Oak Creeks. Then there are the camps or the transitions. These are less secure facilities, and they really are transition programs for these kids where the youth are more integrated into the community and may have access to opportunities in the community throughout the day. The current YCEP educational contractors throughout the state are Harney School District, Intermountain ESD, Multnomah ESD, Tillamook School District, Three Rivers School District, Warren Hammond School District, and Willamette ESD. The average length of stay in a youth educational program for these students is about 82.4 days. Again, average number of students, 400, and then these programs run on a 220-day school year with the required number of hours under rule, which is 5.5 hours a day. Funding for these educational services is approximately $10 million in state school funds for a biennium, with an additional $1.8 million in Title I-D and $278,000 in IDEA funds. That makes up the total funding for the YCEP educational programs. Okay, so we wanted to have the idea behind this concept is really to focus on improving the services to the students. So as we began this conversation at ODE, we really spent a great deal of time looking at our history and the things that have come up in the time that we've done this and the impact that it's had on the students. And so that really is the focus of this, the idea, the decision behind this conversation. And so you can see the impact of multiple contractors on the YCEP students. With 7 different contractors, you get 7 different curriculums because each district or contractor runs its own curriculum within the facilities and the educational programs. You get 7 different school year calendars because, again, each ESD and school district runs their own independent calendar. You get 7 different graduation requirements. I might require 24 credits, you might require 26 credits. If a student moves between facilities, that impacts the student's graduation requirements. You offer 7 different SPED programs and SPED services. You offer 7 different online educational programs. You offer 7 different professional development systems, and they focus on different priorities depending on the district or the ESD. You offer 7 different distinct behavior management styles and classroom expectations, and that affects the kids as they move through the facility. And then with multiple contractors, we're dealing constantly with delays in record transfers and informational transfers about the students. And we're constantly dealing with the registrars trying to enroll and unenroll these students and transfer the records around. And we have many of these students that move frequently. You're also talking about all of these differences combined. And with that, the constant movement of youth between the facilities. For example, we have the example of a student who had 6 different placements in an 8-month period. You can imagine the impact that this had on that student's educational record as they moved from facility to facility, and they had multiple, well, in this case, 6 different requirements that they had to fulfill when they went from one facility to another. The other thing that this does is it impacts the accuracy of the tracking of the student's educational process, because we're always one step behind with what that child was working on in the previous program, where maybe he was working on one Algebra 1 curriculum. Now he comes to a new program. They don't offer that same Algebra 1 curriculum. Now that kiddos they got a 1, the facility has to figure out what was happening with that kiddo in the other facility and how can we implement, or are we able to implement, that same program in our facility. And so it really does impact the student's educational progress, as well as the movement of information and records. There's also an impact on ODE from having 7 different contractors. First of all, the contractors themselves are impacted by the fluctuation of ADM levels because of the fact that each contractor is funded based on the ADM in their facility that they oversee. So with a single contractor, it would allow us to fund the totality of the YCEP ADM with one contractor. So fluctuations within the system, students moving around from one facility to another, would not have an impact on the overall contract. The second bullet there is an example of a student like we just described, a student who moved to 6 different facilities in an 8-month period. That ADM follows that student. So where if a student moves from one facility to another, the single contractor won't be impacted by that ADM like it is now, where the current contractor may lose students, therefore their funding would either go up or go down depending on the number of students that come or go. There's also the issue with dealing with procurement and the time and the cost, and there is a cost to the contract, to the program, for procurement to basically maintain the contracts and then renew the contracts for 7 separate contracts every 2 years. And in this case, really every year, because every year we revise these contracts. And so there is a cost to the program every time we do that. Whether you realize it or not, we pay the Department of Justice out of the YCEP program to review and approve the 7 separate contracts every time we change them. So every year when we change the contracts because of the funding, we have to pay DOJ to review those contracts and approve them. There is a huge fiscal time and cost in our fiscal department for billing, invoicing, and processing of payments on 7 separate contracts. And poor Sam and I are stuck with dealing with 7 different contract managers. And all of that impacts our time and our ability to do the other work that we're required to do. We also, so when we sat down and we looked at this, and this is where I would love to hear you guys on the phone chime in, when we sat down and looked at this, and we really did honestly look at this, and we've had conversations with other players and partners in this, including OYA and then individual superintendents, we said, what are the benefits of the current process? And really all we could identify was that it involves the local school districts and ESDs in educational relationships with the facilities and the community partners who are working in their communities, and that it financially benefits the local districts and the ESDs who have the contract. But we honestly could not identify any other benefits that we could see to the current process. And I would be curious to know if you guys could identify any beyond what we've identified.
So, Mitch, this is Randy Shield in Tillamook. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Randy.
Okay. I appreciate the information so far. There are a couple things that I'm not sure that I would agree with in your analysis there. The whole fluctuation of ADM, I don't, yeah, it would change a little bit for one contractor, but they would be shuffling staff. If you're talking about changes that are significant, they'd be having to shuffle staff between facilities in order to match or meet up with whatever that financial impact was going to be. I don't know that that's a real legitimate, I don't know that that carries a lot of weight, at least for me. Procurement-wise, I'd like to know the actual dollar amount that you project that would be saved by having one contract as opposed to 7 contracts, and what that looks like.
Well, let me answer that one right there. Between procurement and DOJ approval, we average about $100 an hour in costs. And I will tell you that to get a DOJ approval for a YCEP contract, especially this year, it's been extremely difficult with all the changes to contract management that the legislature passed and the DOJ is now doing in light of the whole Cover Oregon situation, that we're looking at anywhere from 8 to 10 hours worth of interactions with DOJ and procurement in order to get our contracts approved this year, and there's no indication that that's going to change anytime soon. So we're talking about a several $100 impact to the program for each contract.
And you're talking 7 contracts, or you're talking 700 contracts?
No, we're talking, well, in this case, YCEP is paying for the cost of getting the contracts approved for YCEP, so we're talking about the 7 contracts that YCEP is having to get approved.
So we're really talking about this in the terms of $700 or $800 per contract over 7 contracts, so you're talking $5,000?
Anywhere from $2,400 to $5,000, depending on how long it takes DOJ to get approval and how much work procurement has to do.
Mitch, do you have any idea? Do you have any idea of the unemployment cost just of the employees that I would have in my district over the course of the next 2 years, and how small $5,000 is?
Well, and Randy, again, I'm not neither here nor there for me, to be honest with you. Again, I'm looking at the impact that ODE has trying to deal with 7 different contractors, and the reality of if we go to a single contractor, how much of that can be alleviated by a single contractor. And again, I'm less concerned about the impact on ODE than I am interested in the impact on the students. That to me is really the focus.
And I'm okay. I expected a number in the tens of thousands of dollars, not a number of less than $5,000. That just surprises me. I don't mean, you know, to be disrespectful of that. That's just a much, much smaller number than I expected. So you asked, I don't want to monopolize this, but you asked for some other rationale because you listed just a couple, local district involvement. So as I sat down and looked at it,
well, and again, Randy, I think the other point to make here too is that's just the cost to the program. That doesn't include the cost in time. There's no way for us to calculate the cost and time for Sam and I to deal with the contracts, the cost and time for procurement and fiscal, the number of hours that they have to spend trying to either, one, negotiate, get these contracts signed and approved, and then fiscal every single quarter trying to process the payments and programs for each and every one of the contracts. So again, that's just our upfront cost for getting the contracts approved. That doesn't include all the time and effort that the individual people have to do on a daily basis or on a quarterly basis.
Okay. From a benefits of the current process, it sounds like involvement with the local school district is kind of pushed off as something that is kind of nice but isn't real valuable. When I look at what our kids get at Trask River, I look at what we do with sharing teachers back and forth that could not be done in the system that you're talking about if we weren't employed by one, sharing back and forth. We do that with art, we do that with natural resources, we do that with lots of our different people within our system to provide opportunities for those kids that they would not get otherwise. We do it in the school year, we do it in the summer months as well. We have art, we have drama, we have little things like that that would not ever be done in a large system like you're talking about. When you get to an area like ours, you have to share a lot of things because you don't have enough need to have a full-time art teacher. You don't have enough kids for that. You don't have enough kids to have a full-time music program or things like that, and yet we can provide those opportunities because we have an art teacher, we have a music teacher. We can do those things with those kids that they wouldn't get otherwise, and so I think that's a big piece. Some of the logistical connections to the district would be substitute teachers, for example. We share the same pool of substitute teachers. Now, we don't have a lot of teachers out there at 5, 6, whatever it is, but to have a pool of subs within our district that are trained, that are certified and so forth, and are also willing to go out there is another big thing for us. We have staff development for those people because in most cases they're all standalone. They're the only English teacher, they're the only SPED teacher, they're the only math teacher, and so we use those people as part of our current system to get staff development, to be able to improve as individuals and to have a sense of belonging to a community, to a staff, to part of a larger system in a district. We also have our board members who are liaisons and are out there on a regular basis. I'm out there on a regular basis. And that connection within a district, that connection of that school as part of ours, we go to their graduation, we hand out diplomas, we do all that. We make them feel like one of the Tillamook schools because they are. I think a lot of those things would be lost. And so when we list just involvement with local district, I don't think you see I don't think that represents the true impact of how that connection with local districts actually improve the education that we give our kids here. So those are some quick examples. I'll let somebody else jump in.
Well, thank you, Randy. I mean, Sam took down notes of everything you mentioned, and I agree with you. You provide a perspective that we sitting here at ODE don't have. And I got to be honest with you, that's the first time that some of these have been mentioned, despite the many conversations we've had with individuals. So we appreciate you providing that perspective. That really does add to the picture.
Right. This is Scott Perry. I'm the interim superintendent of Multnomah ESD, and I'm entering into this conversation without having participated in the previous conversations. I just want to make sure I understand what's envisioned here. If there is a single contractor, is the idea that contractor would be providing a kind of a one-size-fits-all program to all 7 sites? Or is that the idea that single contractor would then subcontract or could potentially subcontract with existing sites? Because if they subcontract, then the concerns just mentioned might not be that big of a concern, but the logistics of subcontracting would create a lot of the expense that ODE currently has. But I'm just wondering what the vision is for a single contract.
Perfect. Scott, that was a perfect segue. So let's move on and talk about what it is that we're looking at for the single contractor proposal. Okay, so the single contract would be approximately $10 million for the biennium. Now, in our opinion, it reduces the contract paperwork, processing, and fiscal cost. It creates one indirect cost, and it clearly reduces overhead to the overall cost of the program. It creates economies of scale because a single contractor can leverage all of the indirect, all the contract funds, all the funding and administrative to basically address the issues around administration, curriculum oversight, technology, SPED services, business management, and provide equity across the programs. And the key there being equity across the programs, so that what a student is receiving or being offered in one program is equivalent to what a student is being offered in another program. And in fact, we're right now in the middle of a situation where we have complaint filed claiming that the young ladies at Oak Creek are not being offered the same services as the young men in the other facilities, and ODE is having to address that issue right now. So right now, equity across the programs is a pretty high, is an issue that's taken on a little bit more importance. The other thing that it would do is it would create uniformity across the programs. You're dealing with a single curriculum. So the one provider would, the one contractor would say, this is the curriculum that we're going to use for math. This is the curriculum we're going to use for language arts. This is the curriculum we're going to use for science. So that no matter what program the student goes to, the student goes from one facility to another. They're not having to switch programs or switch curriculums. They're going to be in the same Algebra 1 program. They're going to be in the same science program. It also would create a one online education system so that if a student were to move from a facility to a facility, they can maintain continuity with the online programs that we're doing. And those of you who are familiar with this program know that a lot of these students do access online programs for the types of classes that are not available because the teaching staff's not available. It would also create one true YCEP district that would have uniform policies and procedures across the state. So everyone would be following the same SPED policies and procedures, the same graduation policies and procedures, all of the things that go, the same business procedures, all the things that go into running these programs, and running an educational program would be uniform across all the different programs throughout the state, which would be a huge plus. Sam? We also would require that the contractor create a single 1.0 FTE statewide YCEP administrator. That YCEP administrator would only have YCEP duties, and so they could basically focus exclusively on the efforts to ensure compliance, integrity, and improvement in the quality of the services provided. So that administrator who's overseeing all of the YCEP programs could work with each one of the facilities, because each one of the facilities is going to have its own unique issues that come up in its own unique flavor. Despite the educational person there, the facilities themselves are completely different across the state. They all offer completely different vocational opportunities for the students. They all offer completely different services from OYA, and so there's going to be uniqueness from each program. We would have written into the contract that ODE and OYA would be involved in the hiring of the YCEP administrator, and then we would also expect that there would either be an administrator or a lead teacher at each site to act as an on-site administrator to make those day-to-day decisions in conjunction with the administration of the facility itself. We would allow, and this goes to your question, Randy, we would allow the single contractor to subcontract, and they would have the option to hire the current YCEP staff or to contract with the current YCEP contractor. That would be entirely up to them. And actually, that wouldn't have an additional impact on ODE, because if a contractor the single contractor would still be the contractor responsible to ODE, and they would be responsible for overseeing the subcontract that they had with whoever they subcontract with. It would be their responsibility to make sure that their subcontractor is meeting the responsibilities and requirements they have with the contract with ODE.
Hi, Mitch. This is Keith over at Willamette, and I have a quick question for you. What you've described, I think, before you started talking about the subcontracting piece, is essentially a single employer for the entire system, and I'm a little confused about how that single employer model could work in a subcontracting model that you've also started to describe.
I guess I'm confused. We have several contractors now that subcontract with local entities to provide the services that they're contracted with us to provide. So, for example, down in Springfield in our long-term care and treatment program, Springfield School District contracts with the Child Center directly to provide the educational services within the Child Center facility, and the subcontract they have with Child Center is basically a reflection of, or for all I know, it's a duplication of the contract that Springfield has with ODE. So Springfield is still the ultimate responsible party, so they would have to hold their subcontractor responsible for providing everything that ODE expects of them in their contract.
So what I'm really thinking about is the notion that we would still have lots of different pay scales, lots of different issues that come around because of collective bargaining in doing that subcontracting and not having a true single employer. It's pretty complicated.
We're not talking about necessarily having a single employer. We're talking about having a single contractor, and that single contractor has the contract with ODE. We don't get involved now with the 7 different contracts we have with you guys. We don't get involved in collective bargaining. We don't get involved in pay scales. We don't get involved in any of that. We say to you, here's the level of funding that you will receive through ODE's contract to provide a YCEP program. You deal with all those issues, and so those issues are no more relevant to us with a single contractor than they would be with the individual contractors, the way we are now. None of that stuff is involved. We don't get involved in any of that stuff when it comes to the contracts we have with you now.
So Mitch, Randy, and Tillamook, you talked about a single contractor and a $10 million contract, and you talked about the overhead costs that you pay on that. I believe right now it's 6%. Is that what I've heard?
Yeah, it varies from contractor to contractor. Every contractor has a different indirect and a different NOE.
So do you feel like you would pay one contractor less on an indirect than you would pay each one individually that you're doing?
No, the indirect may not necessarily, again, I mean, I'm not saying that indirect is one small cost. I would look at it from the standpoint that if we have 7 different contracts and 7 different contractors are taking money out to hire an administrator to oversee this program, or they're paying their business office to oversee this program, and that money is being paid for out of the YCEP dollars, then all of that would be eliminated because it would be reduced down to one contractor paying one business department to do all of the contract work. So yes, we do believe that there would definitely be economies of scale that would save the program money and would leave more money on the table to serve the students.
Until you go to a subcontracting look, and then that changes things, obviously.
No, well, it really doesn't. It would change things for the single contractor, but it wouldn't change anything for ODE.
Right. And what I'm hearing is this, I see the model, and it would be easier for ODE. I don't know, again, that it is about, creating a better educational opportunity for kids, and I think not enough weight is being given to the fact that in my facility, for example, all of my staff are regular Tillamook School District 9 staff members. If that facility closes tomorrow, those staff members have all the bumping rights right back into our system, rightfully so, and that means whatever number came in, that number will go out, and those people will be laid off. That will have an impact in our system, a monumental impact in some ways, let alone the fact that we believe we can educate these kids better at a local level. The system you're talking about, you could extrapolate out into the entire education system in Oregon and say, look, let's have one school district like Hawaii, because that's kind of the idea. The issues that you're addressing here, kids moving, different curriculums, all that are stuff that we deal with every single day as kids come in and out of our districts. That's reality.
And I guess I would just have to say, Randy, that in our conversations here at ODE and in our conversations with our OYA partners, I wouldn't necessarily agree with the analogy that you just made, and I wouldn't necessarily agree with what you're saying, because these are such unique programs, and every one of them is so unique and so different that I don't necessarily agree with what you're saying. Certainly with bumping rights and all of that, because it doesn't make any difference. Any contractor that picks this contract up, whether it be an ESD or a school district, the staff in the facilities are going to have the same rights that your staff at Tillamook School District have now. So the bumping rights and everything else. So.
The staff in our facilities will not, I will almost promise you, will not go to work for whoever the subcontractor is. They will come back into our system.
That's entirely up to them. I mean, obviously, that's a decision that they get to make. Yeah.
Mitch, this is
so. You know what? That was another great segue. So what I would like to do is I would like to segue to kind of a discussion here about what is the decision-making process and what would this look like if we actually move forward. So at this point in time, because this is a program decision, the decision will be made by the program director and the assistant superintendent with input and notification to the deputy superintendent. Many of those conversations have already occurred or already in the process of occurring. So it's not like it's a secret here at ODE that we're considering doing this with the YCEP program.
Can you put names to those, Mitch? Program directors who?
Sarah Drinkwater, Salam Noor, Cindy Hunt. Let's see, who else have we engaged in this conversation?
No, who's a program director and which assistants who?
I am the program director. Sarah Drinkwater is the assistant superintendent.
Okay.
This has been discussed with Salam. You know who Salam is. This has been discussed with Cindy Hunt. Cindy Hunt is our legal affairs specialist. This has been discussed with Rick Krager. Rick Krager is in charge of finance in the department. Who else have we included in this conversation? Jan McComb, who is our legislative liaison. Holy moly! Yeah, this is not a conversation that we started a week ago and hasn't gone anywhere. If it had been, we wouldn't be sitting here having this conversation this morning. So this conversation is going on.
So what I see in the first bullet is it's you and Sarah that will inform Salam as to what you're doing.
That is at this point in time, the guidance that I have been given is that it is our decision to make, and then if we make the decision, it will basically be notifying the management team that we're doing. This is the direction that we're moving.
That's a little worrisome to me.
Okay.
The
first step here would be to hire the idea here, because this is going to be a complicated, if we go down this road, a very complicated request for information or a request for an applicant. And so we're looking at hiring a project manager to assist with the development of a detailed request for information to make sure that we cover all the bases, with basically sending out to find out if there's even anybody that would be interested in taking this contract on. We have no way of knowing for sure that anybody even wants to take this on. So we would, based on the responses to the RFI, if there were individual agencies that were interested in this contract, we would make a request for proposal, and then we would develop that to identify actual contractors who would apply for the contract. And then ODE, in consultation with OYA, our partner in this program, will choose the contractor that would take this contract on. Once a contractor was chosen, a transition plan would be developed in collaboration with ODE, OYA, the new contractor, and you guys, the current contractor. So we would come in and sit down with you, and we would, with all of us together, and say, what would a transition plan need to look like for each one of these facilities in each one of these programs? Okay. The transition plan will include facility visitations and would include a timeline for implementation. for each facility. It would also include, if and when a contractor is chosen, ODE would publish an actual projected timeline for the implementation of the actual single contractor. And that timeline would take into account the different transition timelines for each one of the facilities if they varied. So that's the process at this point in time, the way we've laid it out, that ODE will follow if we decide to go down the road of a single contractor. However, there's also the possibility that we want to consider that if no one wants to take this contract on, so if there's no response to the RFI, and so no one steps up and says, wait, we want to take this on, then or if ODE determines that an appropriate contractor cannot be identified. So, for example, someone applies for the contract, but it's obvious from looking at their application that they don't have the depth, the breadth, and the ability to take this contract on, then ODE still is going to implement improvements to the YCEP program through our current contract process. Clearly, the one thing that's come out of this discussion at ODE and a review of the program as we've gone down the road of looking at this over the last 2 years plus, is that there are some issues with the current process that YCEP educational programs face. They're specifically spelled out in the very beginning of this, where we talked about the impact of having multiple contractors on the student's educational program. So we would use the contract process that currently exists to help mitigate some of those issues in order to align curriculum, align programs, perhaps come up with a single online program, any number of things that we could do to mitigate the things that we've identified that the current program and the current process, the negative impact it has on the students in the program. So that's if this thing doesn't go anywhere, we want to give folks a heads up that we still will be looking at finding ways to improve the program for the students.
Is there anything that stopped you from doing that already? What are the roadblocks to that?
Well, at this point in time, no, there isn't anything that's preventing us from doing that now. We've already had multiple discussions around what that would look like. But again, the conversation really led to it appears to us the ideal solution to this would be to create the single contractor, and that alleviates the majority of the issues that have been raised in our opinion. So that's what we're looking at right now.
And I guess I'd take the other approach to say that if you have the ability to align curriculum across the facilities and fix some of those concerns without the disruption that this is going to face or cause in each individual community, wouldn't that be a better way to go?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
Hey, and that, Tim, go ahead. Do you want to say something?
So Ronnie, here's an example. Like, for instance, like, as of right now for ODE, we, I guess, mandate everyone to use Synergy for student information, but we don't mandate everyone to use Synergy SPED. You know, and that decision is left up to each individual contractor. So then that would be one of the things where we, like ODE, would dictate a lot more. And for instance, like some sites use Acellus, some sites use OdysseyWare. We could state everybody will have Acellus or OdysseyWare. Everybody will do Read 180 and so forth, regardless of whether their school district has contracts with Acellus or not. You know, it'd be more.
And that would be just as disruptive, in our opinion. We believe that would be just as disruptive to the school districts, because they would have to create programs that don't already exist, and they would have to implement programs that don't already exist. And
well,
then it would
I would say from a school district standpoint, and I'm looking at it from a completely different side of this.
Yes, you are.
From a school district standpoint, if you were in this seat, I'd say you'd probably feel otherwise. You'd feel like changing curriculum and changing some programs and things like that is entirely different than uprooting an entire staff and program that we've developed over the course of the last 20 years. So,
well, I appreciate that perspective.
I want to weigh in on something. This is Scott Perry again. I feel the energy of this. I feel this seems like it's a train that's moving down the path, and just a thought here, and that is that doing a what I call a pre-mortem, and that is if this were to go really wrong, what would be the elements that would likely go wrong? I know the military, for example, when they did the Osama bin Laden raid, they had an entire team that came in just to naysay, just to find all the flaws that could potentially happen, and so they could plan for contingencies around those. It seems to me that Randy has brought up several things that could really reduce the quality of this if they're not attended to. And it seems to me that in the development of the RFP, the criteria for the RFP, maybe there's some ways that, or some requirements on the single contractor that could be put into place that they would need to describe in their RFP process that could mitigate some of those concerns. I really think that it's important. I mean, things that I'm hearing about loss of ability to leverage local resources, I also can think of some other potential challenges. It really might be valuable to pause and say, let's take a serious look at those concerns and see if we can address them in the RFP process so they end up not being concerns.
That's a very good point, Scott, and actually you identified exactly what the majority of the conversation has been here. We have sat down with several players here at the department, and especially folks that are outside this program who have district experience, much like myself, and have said, okay, if we were to go down the road and do this, what are some of the problems that we would have, that we would create, that we don't realize now with a single contract? Are there things that we're missing with a single contract? How difficult would it be for one contractor to be able to oversee programs that are what's the word I'm looking for? I mean, we have programs that are on the coast, and we have programs that are over in Eastern Oregon. So they're what's the word I'm looking for?
Cohesive.
There's unique elements of those programs.
Yeah. Well, and then just the geographical. Thank you. That's the word I'm looking for. Just the geographical logistics of trying to monitor these programs and maintain these programs when they're so spread out across the state. We've looked at the possibility of, what would the impact be on an individual contractor if we went in and said, you know what, you're running a certain student information or SPED system, and that's not the SPED system we want. I mean, we would be duplicating the issues that we would with the individual contractors anyway. So we really have spent a great deal of time doing just what you described and trying to figure out what are the pros and cons of going down the road with this thing. And even from the standpoint of logistically, ODE trying to oversee one single $10 million contract for 11 different facilities and all the implications of that as well. So there are a lot of things that we've looked at and considered. That's why, again, we said we would want to bring in a professional a professional program manager to help us project manager, thank you, that would help us walk through the process with all of the stakeholders that would be impacted to be able to identify those things. And that's what the project manager's job would be, to go out and identify the kinds of things that Randy has raised to make sure that they're addressed not only in the RFI, but ultimately in the RFP, so that they would be also addressed in the contract when the contract came to be. Because ultimately that's where those things need to be raised, is in the contract, so that the contract is addressing all of the potential issues that could occur with a single contractor. So that is this is not something we're talking about doing in the next month or 2 months. This is something that's going to take a great deal of time It's going to take a great deal of consideration for us to move down the road, which is also why we're very clear with the fact that we may do an RFI, and we may get 4 responses to the RFI, and we may look at those responses to the RFI and say, you know what, it's clear that there's nobody out there that either 1, is willing to take this on, or 2, that has the capacity to take this on. So this is by no means a done deal.
Mitch, this is Keith over at Willamette. Do you have a plan for the cost associated with the project management? Is that a year-long contract with someone? Is that I'm just thinking about if we're looking at reducing the overall cost and getting more money into the classroom for kids, that we're investing an awful lot in the preparation of RFPs and RFIs, both on ODE's side and also on potential contractor side.
None of that money would come out of ODE's part of the money that we take. There would not be any cost to the program or to the funding that goes out to the contractors.
Great. One other suggestion is if this were to head down that road, I think I mentioned in the principals meeting a while back that bringing on the administrator that would administer the YCEP program in a single contractor model early would be important. And in finding a way to make certain that there's a 6 to 9 month or longer lead time available for that person to integrate into the system would be really important. So maybe looking at the way that you fund the program, where those resources might come from, because this, like you said, is a complicated matter.
And thank you, Keith. Those are things that we definitely have discussed at length, especially when it comes to looking at what a transition plan or what a transition for a program for this kind of a move, what that transition would look like. And again, we've clearly come to the idea that there would be several levels of implementation that would occur, because you would have the individual facilities themselves, because each one of these facilities, even though they're run by OYA, they're run as virtually independent facilities. So each one facility would have its own unique transition plan to move from one contractor to another, and then there would also be the overall implementation plan that said how would we move as each facility is moving, how would we move to a single contractor. So those certainly are things that we've considered, but I appreciate you raising that again, because again, just to let you know, those are things that we've discussed. Okay, any other questions? Any other comments that folks want to make?
Mitch, I know on the contract in the past, and I haven't looked at it recently, that ODE was responsible if a program was closed for the cost of closing that program, back when we were discussing, I think, before you were there. If that's still there, would that apply to the closing of a program as far as changing of staff?
No.
So ultimately the cost, so ultimately then what you're saying is the cost that is going to come back to my district when this goes to a single contractor will be borne by my district and nobody else. And so what I'm talking about are staffing costs, relocation back into our system, other people out of our system, and the costs associated with that. There isn't any then protection within this contract that helps us in that transition.
Not that I'm aware of.
So I guess back to the point of, you know, which perspective you're looking at this from. And I would encourage you to do what you can to look at it from a district perspective looking back as well.
Okay,
so
thank you for the suggestion. Yep.
Mitch, could you also, this is Keith again at Willamette, could you talk a little bit about what ODE staffing levels would look like in this model? Would there be a change in terms of the total number of FTE in your departments and that are associated with the YCEP contracts?
I couldn't address that right now. I mean, that's something that I mean, as we move down the road that we would look at. I'm not today to have a conversation about that. I wouldn't even begin to be able to answer that question.
Fair enough.
This is Mark Jeffrey. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
I apologize. I was a little late getting in. Had a meeting overrun. But what's the time frame as far as you're making the decision?
That's a really good question. Go ahead, Sam.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so first of all, we have also meetings with OIA's leadership.
Yeah, we haven't met with them yet either.
Right. For instance, like with the directors and their assistant directors and so forth, and we're gonna, and I think it's next week or the following week or whatever, then we're gonna listen to their concerns and their thoughts and so forth. Then we're gonna sit down internally and we're gonna look at things, and we still need to talk, you know, with our higher ups and so forth. So whether to proceed and so forth. So, but the project, we're hoping if we get the green light, if everything goes smoothly, perhaps we start the process in March, April.
So here's what I would tell you, actually, as the program director. I would tell you, and Sam makes a good point. I really couldn't answer that question right now because we really haven't completed getting all the input from all the different players that we want to talk to. And so once that's done, then it would result in, like Sam said, us sitting down and having an internal conversation with the folks here at the department to say, you know, okay, these are all the issues that were raised. Here are the implications. Here's the pros. Here's the cons. Where do we want to go with this thing? And so I would tell you at this point in time, sitting here the first week in January, I would tell you that if there was going to be a decision that was going to be made to actually pull the trigger on this and actually hire a project manager to start to develop an RFI, if that decision will probably be made before the end of March.
And then you talked about some of the steps involved earlier. I guess what I'm trying to look at is if we're not going to, and obviously we wouldn't have the capacity to respond to your RFI, so we would be looking at closing out our contract. Well, that has budget implications for us, and are you talking this would take effect for the in September? Would it July 1?
Oh heavens, no. No, this process realistically, if this, and I think Keith really hit on it, this process is probably anywhere from a 9 to a 12-month process before this thing would be actually implemented.
So we're looking at July 1, 2017.
At the earliest.
It will not affect the 16-17 school year.
Well, and our intention for the beginning was to not let it affect this biennium's contracts and this biennium's fundings. So the idea was if we were going to consider this thing and implement it, it would be in the next biennium.
Okay.
Mitch, this is Dave Novotny from Willamette. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing this information with us. I'd like to know, have you completed any type of preliminary analysis as far as the cost associated with making this type of transition? That would include the cost of a project manager, the RFI, RFP process, hiring an administrator 6 to 12 months in advance, because I think we're talking about big bucks as far as making this transition, and we need to understand what kind of impact that's going to have on funding.
Well, and again, with the whole RFI process, that funding for all of that, and it would also be a possibility that the funding for bringing an administrator on early would all come out of the funding that ODE pulls off the top, because we also have administrative costs that we take from this program. And so we would, I have no intention of passing the cost for those things on to the contractors. You guys have the responsibility of serving the kids, so ODE would take the responsibility for doing that internally.
Thank you, Mitch. But has that analysis been done, or a preliminary analysis, something that we can look at as far as the cost-benefit analysis?
No. In other words, yes, we're having the conversation, but I don't have anything that I would show you.
I would also include into that the cost to districts.
And again, that's not something that I don't know. I'm not sure if that's something we would calculate or that we would, I mean, again, I understand that there would be an impact. But again, I can tell you right now, my procurement department would tell me that that happens with every contract we terminate and move to a different contractor. So again, I don't know what kind of play that would get internally at ODE, but I certainly will make sure that it gets put on the table as one of the things that was raised.
Mitch, have you, I know you haven't, so it's rhetorical, would you survey the 7 contractors to get their opinions individually on this?
At this point in time, to be honest with you, I don't know if we would or not. I mean, again, that's something that if someone internally here were to suggest to say, you know, let's, but again, that's the purpose of having the conversation that we're today, and the fact that we already have met with the principals from the facilities, we've met with the OIA educational folks, we're going to meet with the OIA management. So I don't, at this point in time, I don't know if that's something we would, an additional step we would take or not.
Okay. Do you have an idea of who outside of ODE and your team is fully on board with this?
Sam, you want to try to answer that? I don't know. I guess I'm not understanding the question. If you're asking,
am I completely in the minority saying, wait a minute, I think this is a bad plan for us as a district and for the kids that we have out there right now. I can't support this plan. Am I alone there? Am I completely out on an island, or are others going, wait a minute, this doesn't quite make sense. It doesn't seem to pencil out as being a good move and for what we're trying to accomplish. So I guess I don't know.
At this point in time, given the folks that we've talked to, Randy, the answer would be yes.
Yes, others are yes, in on this, and
no, yes, you're on an island.
Really? Okay.
Mitch, I would say that he's not on an island, that we do have significant concerns, and we're trying to look at this with an open mind. This is Keith, by the way. We're trying to look at it in an open mind and understand what the impacts would be on both our programs and our students and our staff. But to suggest that no one has a concern, I think would be a big overstatement.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that.
This is Mark Jeffrey again. Number one, I found it interesting that the principals in our facilities were approached before the superintendents. I don't know if that's been raised as a concern. It doesn't seem quite right, and it was, and maybe I'm misinterpreting what my principals shared, but there seemed to be real concern on their part with this proposal. Did you get that sense when you talked with them?
I would tell you that the issues and the concerns that they raised were the same concerns that have been raised here today. So it wasn't like they didn't raise anything unique or anything that we hadn't considered or heard in the past. So to answer your question, I mean, it basically, the concerns they raised were the same ones we've heard today.
Which meant they had concerns, which meant they weren't on board, which meant that I would agree. I'm probably not on an island here.
Okay, fine. Then I'm not going to. Okay, fine. Then I guess you're not on an island. That to put it in that perspective, there are others that have the same concerns that you do, from the standpoint of the contractors that hold the current contracts.
Right.
So, Mitch, are you saying that the people that you feel are supportive of the plan are those other than contractors, and that it would be safe to assume that the contractors are the ones that have the concerns?
I would tell you that right now that would be a correct statement. I would tell you that from the standpoint of internally at ODE and from what we've obtained from OYA, the contractors are the only ones who are the current contractors are the only ones who are raising issues. And most of those issues relate to the impact it'll have on them directly.
Okay. And so let me get this in my head, and I'm not probably as proficient on this as I should be. Am I right in that the contracts that we signed this go around were just for a single year?
is for a single year, but our intention was to, it's actually a biennium because the reason why it's single year because we have to add money. We can't promise you 2 years worth of money until we have our budget. So in March, we'll send out another amendment for 16-17, but then that for 16-17, you don't have to submit an RFP or respond to an RFP. It'll just be renewed. And that was part of the original contract that you signed in, I believe, 13-15. It said where there's a stipulation where that contract was renewable up to 4 years without having to do an RFP.
But to answer your question in another way, though, all of the contracts that ODE writes under DOJ guidance can be terminated at any time. And so ODE always reserves the right to be able, so in other words, even though you signed a contract for this year, ODE reserves the right to whether or not to allow any contractor to renew the contract for the following year. So even though you currently hold a contract with ODE, the way ODE does all of its contract, ODE has an out for every contract. I mean, that's putting it very simplistically, but that is the reality that ODE's procurement and the DOJ have built into the program, into the system.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate you sharing that.
Any other questions or concerns?
Mitch, I feel some risk in mentioning this, but the way that you characterize the contractors having concerns as being a contractor concern, what I think we're all looking at is what is the impact on the students in our classroom. And we see that there could be some benefit, but we also see Randy's point and Mark's point and others that there could be some detriments to this as well. And I guess all we're asking for is caution and that all of the contractors be heard and have an opportunity to express what the core of their program looks like and how it's different from other programs and how that benefits kids. We're here to serve kids. We're not here to serve our agencies or our districts. And so the plan really has to keep them central to what happens down the road.
Keith, I don't make a single decision as a program director that benefits anybody but the kids. I don't make any decisions, and my team knows that every conversation we have about every decision we make, all of the 15 programs I oversee, what's best for the kids is the bottom line each time, every time, always. And so this case will be no different. We will weigh the benefits to the kids with all the other issues that you guys have raised, and Randy raised some very good points today. We will take all that into consideration, but I can assure you of one thing, that if for any reason we believe that this program will be detrimental to the students or to the students' educational programs while they're in these lockup facilities, we will not go forward with this program. And more than likely, we would instead modify, adjust, and amend the contracts to accomplish the same thing without having to go to a single contractor.
Thanks, I appreciate that.
Okay, well, if that's it then, folks, we're going to go ahead and thank you guys very much. Again, you know how to reach us. If you come up with any additional ideas or suggestions or concerns, please don't hesitate to reach out to us and let us know so that we can take them into consideration as we move down the road with making this decision. And again, you guys are the first ones to know when and if a decision is made and what that decision is.
Mitch, can we have access to your PowerPoint as well, so we have that information?
Absolutely. Not only can you have access to the PowerPoint, but I believe Sam recorded this and will be posting it, so you'll get the whole shoot and match.
Okay, where do we find that then?
Sam, will you send him an email telling him, Sam, when he gets it posted?
Oh, perfect. Perfect. Thanks a lot.
All right, you guys have a great day.
All right, you too.